Hello, boys and girls. This is chapter 5 of Where the Red Fern Grows. Hopefully it is just part 1 of 2, but this is a long chapter, so we may have to do this in 3 parts. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. On arriving at the depot, my nerve failed me. I was afraid to go in. I didn't know what I was scared of, but I knew I was scared. Before going around to the front, I peeked in a window. The station master was in his office looking at some papers. He was wearing a funny little cap that had no top in it. He looked friendly enough, but I couldn't muster up the courage to go in. I cocked my ear to see if I could hear puppies crying, but could hear nothing. A bird started chirping, and it was a yellow canary in a cage. The station master walked over and gave it some water, and I thought, anyone that is kind to birds surely wouldn't be mean to a little boy. With my courage built up, I walked around the front and eased myself past the office. He glanced at me and turned back to his papers. I walked clear around the depot again, and I walked slowly past the office. Glancing from the corner of my eye, I saw the station master looking at me and smiling. He opened up the door and came out on the platform. I stopped and leaned against the building. Yawning and stretching his arms, he said, "It sure is hot today. It doesn't look like we're ever going to get any rain." I looked up at the sky and said, "Yes, sir. It is hot, and we sure could do with a good rain. We need one bad rain up where I am from." He asked me where I lived. I told him, "Up the river a little ways." "You know," he said, "I have some puppies in there for a boy that lives up the river, and his name is Billy Coleman. I know his dad, but I have never seen the boy. I figured he would be in after the puppies today." On hearing this remark, my heart jumped clear up in my throat. I thought surely it was going to hop right out on the depot platform. I looked up and tried to tell him who I was, but something went wrong. When the words finally came out, they sounded like the squeaky old pulley on our well when Mama drew up a bucket of water. I could see the twinkle in the station master's eyes. He came over and laid his hand on my shoulder. In a friendly voice, he said, "So, you're Billy Coleman. How is your dad?" I told him that Papa was fine and handed him the slip that my grandfather had given me. "They sure are fine pups," he said. "You'll have to go around to the freight door." I'm sure my feet never touched the ground as I flew around the building. He unlocked the door and I stepped in looking for my dogs. I couldn't see anything but boxes and barrels, old trunks, and some rolls of barbed wire. The kindly station master walked over to one of the boxes. "Do you want box and all?" he asked. Told him I didn't want the box. All I wanted was my dogs. "How are you going to carry them?" he asked. "I think they're a little too young to follow you." And I held out my gunny sack. He looked at me and looked at the sack. Chuckling, he said, "Well, I guess dogs can be carried that way as anything else, but we'll have to cut a couple of holes to stick their heads through so they won't smother." Getting a claw hammer, he started tearing off the top of the box. As the nails gave way, the board splintered. I heard several puppy whimpers. I didn't walk over. I just stood and waited. After what seemed like hours, the box was open. He reached in, lifted the pups out, and set them down on the floor. "Well, there they are," he said. "What do you think about 'em?" I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. All I could do was stare at them. They seemed to be blinded by the light and kept blinking their eyes. One sat down on his little rear and started crying. The other one was waddling around and whimpering. I wanted so much to step over and pick them up. Several times I tried to move my feet, but they seemed to be nailed to the floor. I knew the pups were all mine, yet I couldn't move. My heart started acting like a dizzy grasshopper. I tried to swallow, but I couldn't. My Adam's apple wouldn't work. One pup started my way. I held my breath. On he came until I felt a scratchy little foot on mine. The other pup followed. A warm puppy tongue caressed my sore foot. I heard the station master say, "They already know you." I knelt down and gathered them in my arms. I buried my face between the wiggling bodies, and I cried. The station master, sensing something more than just two dogs and a boy, waited in silence. Rising with the two pups held close to my chest, I asked him if I owed anything. He said, "Well, there is a small feed bill, but I'll take care of it. It's not much anyway." Taking his knife, he cut two slits in the sack. He put the pups in it and worked their heads through the holes. As he handed the sack to me, he said, "Well, there you are. Goodbye and good hunting." Walking down the street toward town, I thought, now, maybe the people won't stare at me when they see what I've got. After all, not every boy owns two good hounds. Turning the corner onto Main Street, I threw out my chest. I hadn't gone far before I realized that the reception I got wasn't what I thought it would be. People began to stop and stare, and some even snickered. I couldn't understand why they were staring. Surely it couldn't be at the two beautiful hound pups sticking out of the gunny sack. Thinking that maybe I had a hole in the seat of my breeches, I looked over to my reflection in a plate glass window. I craned my neck for a better view of my rear end. I could see a patch there all right and a few threadbare spots, but no whiteness was showing through. I figured that the people were just jealous because they didn't have two good hounds. All around, people began to roar with laughter. Someone shouted, "What's the matter, John? Are you seeing things today?" I hurried on, wanting to get away from the stares and the snickers. It wouldn't have happened again in 100 years, but there they came, the two old women I had met before. We stopped and had another glaring fight. One said, "I declare," and the other one snorted, "Well, I never." My face burned. I couldn't take any more. After all, a man can stand so much and no more. In a loud voice I said, "You may have these people fooled with those expensive-looking feathers in your hats, but I know what they are. They're goose feathers painted with iodine." One started to say something, but her words were drowned out by the roaring laughter from all around. Gathering up their long skirts, they swished on down the street. All around me, people began to shout questions and laughed. One wanted to know if I had the mother of the puppies in my sack. Storekeepers stepped out and gawked. I could see the end of the street, but it looked as if it were 100 miles away. My face was red as a fox's tail. I ducked my head down, tightened my grip on the sack, and walked on. I don't know where they came from, but like chickens coming home to roost, they flocked around me. Most of them were about my age. Some were a little bigger, some smaller. They ganged around me, screaming and yelling. They started clapping their hands and chanting, "The dog boy has come to town. Look, the dog boy has come to town. The dog boy has come to town." My heart burst. Tears came rolling. The day I had waited for so long had turned black and ugly. The leader of the gang was about my size. He had a dirty freckled face and his two front teeth were missing. I suppose he had lost them in a back alley fight. His shock of yellow sunburnt hair bobbed up and down as he skipped and jumped to the rhythm of the Dog Boy song. He wore a pair of cowboy boots, but they were 2 sizes too big for him, no doubt handed down by an older brother. He stomped on my foot. I looked down and saw a drop of blood ooze from under the broken nail. It hurt like the dickens, but I gritted my teeth and I walked on. Then Freckleface pulled the ear of my little girl pup. I heard her painful cry. That was way too much. I hadn't worked 2 long, hard years for my pups to have some freckle-faced punk pull their ears. Swinging the sack from my shoulder, I walked over and set it down in the doorway. As I turned around to face the mob, I doubled my fist, and I took a Jack Dempsey stance. Freckleface said, "So you want to fight?" and he came in swinging. I reached way back in Arkansas somewhere. By the time my fist had traveled all the way down to the Cherokee Strip, there was a lot of power behind it. Smack on the end of Freck's nose, it exploded. With a loud grunt, he sat down in the dusty street. Grabbing his nose in both hands, he started rocking, moaning, and crying. I saw the blood squeeze out between his fingers. Another one sailed in. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to wrestle. He stuck a finger in my mouth. I ground down and bit him. Shaking his hand and yelling like the hoot owls were after him, he ran across the street. Another boy bored in. I aimed for his eye, but my aim was a little low. I caught him in the Adam's apple. A sick look came over his face. Bending over, croaking like a bullfrog that had been caught by a water moccasin, he started going around in a circle. But there were too many of them. By sheer weight and numbers, they pulled me down. I managed to twist over on my stomach and buried my face in my arms. I could feel them beating and kicking my body. All at once, the beating stopped. I heard loud cries from the gang. Turning over on my back, I was just in time to see the big sheriff plant a number 12 boot in the seat of the last kid. I just knew I was next. I wondered if he'd kick me while I was down. I lay where I was. He started toward me. I closed my eyes. I felt a hand as big as an anvil clamp on my shoulder. I thought, he's going to stand me up and then knock me down. He raised me to a sitting position. His deep, friendly voice said, "Are you all right, son?" I opened my eyes. There was a smile on his wide, rugged face. In a choking voice, I said, "Yes, sir, I'm all right." He helped me to my feet. His big hands started brushing the dust from my clothes. Boys and girls, I'm going to stop right here. That's a good stopping place for part 1. And in just a second, I will have part 2 for you. See you in a minute.